From the land of the midnight, it's the Philosophy Jerks.
Welcome, this is the Philosophy Jerks. This is episode number 12. We are the cure for the common conversation. I am Brian, joined as always by...
The one, the always, Josh.
The one and the always.
Yeah, you know, eternal.
Is it like the Omega? You are the beginning and the end?
It was the Alpha and the Omega, so...
Oh,
yeah.
The Alpha and the Omega, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can. I'd be the snake eating my own tail, that kind of thing.
Something like that. So, Josh, spring is here. The weather has broke. We've had warm days. The snow is melting. You got to be feeling good about that.
Oh, I love it. My window's been open all day today, and all the birds are chirping. I heard geese fly overhead. My cat's in the window. It's a good time.
I rode my car with the windows down. It was a good time.
Oh, it's just beautiful. Getting all that like winter smell out of the back seat of your car.
Yes, although now it's just muddy and wet everywhere, but I'll take it.
Yeah, fuck yeah, I'll take it.
All right. Well, the only thing better than spring coming is, Josh, we have a special guest for this episode.
Really? I was not prepared for this. Who is this?
Well, we've hounded him since pretty much the inception of this show, and we finally got him to come. He is the owner of 80shorrornet.com, Derek Schweigert.
Oh.
He's going to be joining us later. Yeah, he's going to be joining us later in the show to talk horror and horror films, or gore and horror films.
Well, if we're talking horror and gore with him, I'm totally expecting it to be a perfect and awesome conversation.
Well, Josh, you hounded him long enough, and he said, fine, we'll talk about gore. Derek, come on the show.
Yeah, I had to, the writers was kind of weird. I had to get him a new set of weights, some protein shakes, like a new cat toy. It was hard to get this guy in a room.
And some guitar picks. We had to throw those in there, too.
Of course. But those were like givens. Those were like the free chocolates at the secretary's desk. He just kind of took a handful of them.
Oh, I cannot wait to get Derek on here later. But before that, Josh, there's something we have to do.
Would that be the fine cheese review?
Fine cheese? What is this, France? No, it's the beer review, Josh.
Oh!
Beer, 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 I'm going for a beer. Beer, 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 I'm gonna drink some beer. I like drinking beer. Lovely, lovely beer.
Okay, Josh, what are we drinking this episode?
This episode, we're drinking Founders Dirty Bastard.
Yes, the Dirty Bastard from Founders. This is a potent beer, Josh.
Yes, it is. 8.5%.
8.5%. This beer does not mess around. It's a brown bottle, of course.
Of course. What else would it be?
The label's pretty interesting. We should touch on it a little bit. It's called Dirty Bastard, and the picture of the guy in the front of the bottle does look a little bit like a dirty bastard.
He kind of resembles what I would imagine the sailor from The Simpsons. You know who I'm talking about?
Mixed with Willie from The Simpsons, too.
Oh, yeah, like a Scottish salesman.
Yes, this is a Scottish brew, as they say. With St. Patrick's Day coming up, I tried to find this kind of maybe like an Irish brew. I couldn't really find anything that was not Guinness. You know, Guinness is how cliche can you get.
Well, true, but isn't it brewed in Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Founders?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dirty Bastard is. Guinness is not, Josh. Come on now.
I was going to say, like, what's so Scottish about a Grand Rapids beer?
Very true. Well, they said it's a Scottish ale. Whatever.
I was going to say, if it's just the recipe, I too can go online and download a recipe and make Scottish whatever, but it's not the same.
Maybe we should have done that with an Irish beer.
That's it. We're going to pony up the cash and fly over to Ireland.
All right. But before that, let's get on with Dirty Bastard here. Here is Founder's own description of the Dirty Bastard. They say, so good, it's almost wrong. Dark ruby in color and brewed with 7 varieties of imported malts. Complex in finish with hints of smoke and peat, paired with a malty richness and a right hook of hop power to give it the bad attitude that a beer named Dirty Bastard has to live up to. This isn't for the wee lads.
Well, I can definitely assure our listeners and myself that this is definitely a beer that you need to take with caution. I kind of overdid it this time, and it really hits you fast with that 8.5, but it's so crisp.
It is. It smells almost like a IPA, but it's dark like it's almost dark like a stout. It's more of a brown, I would say, though.
Yeah, it's definitely more brown than a stout.
But when you drink it, it hits you with that hop taste, like an IPA. But then it finishes like a brown beer. This is like a brown ale mixed with an IPA.
Well, for me, I get the bite of the IPAs, but I don't get that weird, slightly hoppy, skunky aftertaste.
Yeah, that an IPA will give you.
Yeah, totally.
So I gotta say, with that description, I'm kind of a fan of this. Let's take another swig here before I give a final decision. Whew.
Ooh, that's good.
You feel it. It's good. That's a beer though. That'll hit you.
Well, these are definitely ones for like a hot summer night's block party or on the beach or something. Just make sure you have nothing important to do later on, because then you're kind of screwed.
And that you're not driving afterwards. Definitely not driving after these.
Yeah, I would not recommend driving after any beverage of alcohol.
Well, yes. Fair point, Josh. Just extra not driving with this one, whatever that means. All right, Josh, the Dirty Bastard. It's a kind of an IPA mixed with the brown ale. They call it a Scottish ale. Thumbs up or thumbs down for you?
Well, I've had other Founders beers. This is not my first Founders. And for Founders, this is definitely not one of their best ones. But if you consider all of the craft beers out in the ring, this definitely stacks up above them. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a thumbs up. But I think Founders can do better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Founders has quite a high standard to live up to of their own brews. They're probably the most well-known brewery in Michigan. So you're right. For Founders, probably not their best, but I definitely like this beer. If I don't plan on doing anything important for a night, I'm drinking more of the Dirty Bastards. So that's going to be a thumbs up for me too.
Excellent. Well, let's have a couple more while the audience sits through another break, and let's get on to the show.
Yes, it's going to be gore and horror movies with none other than Derek Schweigert coming up next on the Philosophy Jerks.
Mm-hmm.
Beer, 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 I'm going for a beer. Beer, 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 I'm gonna drink some beer. I like drinking beer. Lovely, lovely beer.
You can't see them, but you will hear them.
They're right behind us!
Witness the spectacle the internet wasn't quite ready for. Never have you witnessed such terror, such blood-curdling horror. And just keep repeating to yourself,
it's only a podcast. It's only a podcast. It's only a podcast.
This March, Philosophy Jerks.
This film is rated R. No one under 17 will be admitted.
Remember when you ran away and I got on my knees and begged you not to leave because I'd go berserk? Well, you left me anyhow, and then the days got worse and worse, and now you see I've gone completely out of my mind. And they're coming to take me away, ha-ha, they're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha, to the funny farm where life is beautiful all the time, and I'll be happy to see those nice young men in their clean white coats, and they're coming to take me away, ha-ha. You thought it was a joke.
Okay, welcome back. Josh, are you hanging in there?
I'm hanging tough, like the new kids on the block, man.
All right. That is an old reference. As much as you rip on me for the 90s, that's another 90s reference from you.
Hey, I was, I did come of age during that time.
Yeah, as we both did. As did the guest that we're about to bring in.
Wait, we have a guest?
We do have a guest, Josh, for this topic. Quite apt for the topic of gore. We are bringing in the owner and runner of the website, 80shorror.net, Derek Schweigert.
Holy shit, I am a huge fan of this guy.
So let's quit fooling around. Let's just bring him in now.
Okay. Well, hi guys. I appreciate the warm welcoming. I'm very flattered by your kind words.
Ooh, kind words. Really, you got all that from that little bit?
Yes, and of course, I've I have to mention that I've been mentioned a few times before in previous episodes, and I'm very flattered by the positive things that you've said about me. So I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we have been hounding you not only through social media but through the power of our own show to get you onto the show, and we finally worked it out, and here you are.
For the listeners that don't quite remember, this is Derek that I had aproposly compared to the Buddha in a few episodes back.
And for the longest time, I was still kind of trying to determine what you meant by that reference and comparison. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or if you were just calling me a lazy bum, or
I was
what the idea
definitely
was,
calling
but...
you a lazy bum, but in the highest regard.
Okay. I can live with that, I guess.
All right, Derek, before we get going too far, why don't you tell us about your website, 80shorror.net. That's actually the number 80.
Yes, that's right. Again, I'm really glad to be here talking about Gore because it's something that is very special to me, I suppose you could say. And the website that you're talking about, 80shorror.net, I started it about a year and a half ago. And basically, it's a website that focuses on specifically 80s horror movies. And it's basically a movie database which I've attempted to include every horror movie from the 80s in. And in addition to that, I've also attempted to provide full-length versions of as many 80s horror movies as I possibly could find.
You also have a YouTube channel where you review some of them as well, I believe?
Yep, that's right as well. I've been reviewing a lot in the past, and I haven't so much recently because I've been focusing so much on getting the content on the website, but I plan to do a lot more reviews very soon in the future.
Well, Derek, do you pirate these movies, or how are you providing the content to the audience?
It's a good question, Josh. I appreciate you asking me that. So basically, and I'm sure you're aware of this, and many of the listeners may be as well, but a lot of people in a very benevolent, active piracy, perhaps, have been kind enough to upload a lot of movies to YouTube and other places. And so generally what I do is I attempt to locate as many movies as I can and sort of provide the links to these particular movies, and then you can sort of watch them on the pages I provide on the site.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're kind of like pirating via proxy.
I wouldn't like to say that exactly, but...
Well, that's okay. The
FCC
isn't quite listening to us yet.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
You're just providing you're just telling people where to get the drugs. You're not actually selling drugs.
Precisely, exactly. I like to provide a medium that will provide exposure to hidden gems in the 80s, and that's what my goal is, basically.
Well, Derek,
Right,
from one horror movie fan to another, I deeply appreciate your efforts. And it's a really nice website. I kind of look at it as like a YouTube playlist on crack with way more content to it. So if anyone's interested in 80s movies, definitely check this website out. It's going to have everything there for you.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, actually. It's broken down by the year, alphabetically, of course. It's nice. Derek, we are fans for sure.
Thanks. What I was kind of trying to do was attempting to mimic the classic 80s video store kind of appeal, and so I've included all of the cover art on each individual film, and so I kind of wanted to organize it nicely in that way for people to find. So,
well, you did a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said before, horror has always really played an important role in my life. I've sort of been watching even extreme gore for pretty much as long as I can remember. So this was kind of like an attempt to maximize my nostalgia, if you will.
Well, since we moved on real quick to the topic of gore, you had mentioned just now that you have been watching gory movies since you were a child. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I guess depending on exactly what you would consider extreme gore, I guess it might be slightly ambiguous, but I remember actually watching Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead, for the first time when I was about 12. And for those that haven't seen this film, firstly, you should watch it. But also, it's oftentimes cited as the goriest movie of all time. So,
it's definitely on my top 3.
I have not seen it. See, this is where the conversation will get fairly interesting, is you guys share a love of horror movies. I wouldn't say I have a hatred. That would not be the correct word, but maybe I've never shared... maybe an aversion. I do tend to avoid horror movies more often than not because of not because of being scared. I do have an aversion to extra gory movies. So maybe that's where we should take it, because I'm curious. I want to know from both of you, what is it about gore or goriness in movies that attracts you to them?
Well, it's kind of an interesting topic because I feel like to some extent the idea behind gore has sort of been appealing to people for a long time, and actually it's an interesting kind of fact about the evolution of gore. But sort of the first instance of gore in popular culture, you can kind of see it in the early 20th century. They had this in France. They had this specialized show where they would actually attempt to bring about these kind of body mutilations on stage and attempt to reenact certain kinds of scenes of extreme gore. And this would often attract kind of a large audience. And I think that there is sort of this underlying tendency for a lot of people to kind of be attracted to this notion of what the body would be like in these different kinds of states of, these kind of different gory states. And for me, it's sort of something associated with that, I think. I mean, I can't watch like realistic gore if real gore happening in real life. If I see something happening like this, I have to turn away. But there's this disconnect with fictional gore that I kind of find appealing, and I perhaps can't entirely put my finger on it, but maybe Josh could elaborate if he has something to say about that.
Well, definitely, but before I elaborate, real quick, are you referring to the French movie Un Chien Andalou, where the woman's eye is cut?
I've seen that, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't referring specifically to this. What I was talking about before was actually the very, very early 20th century, and it wasn't in film. This was actually on stage, like an on-stage production.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but what the movie that you're talking about, the short that you're talking about, I think it's Luis Buñuel is the director, and it's kind of one of the first primary instances of gore in like extreme gore in cinema. So I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, though.
Well, it's one of my favorite gory, quote unquote gory examples on film. And I think a lot of that has to do with my love for Salvador Dali, who had a tremendous amount of input on like the general look and feel of the whole movie or the whole short. But to go back to your earlier point, I have the same kind of attraction to fictional gore as you, in that I don't really look forward to gore in real life. But I don't know, like for fictional gore, it's kind of a surreal and visceral experience where my brain is kind of caught in a quagmire. What I mean by that is that, conceptually I know what I'm watching is a film, but it's almost like the reptilian parts of my brain interpret the visual input as a real danger or a real event to pay attention to in the least bit. So for me, I just like my response to it. The gorier the better, because for me, the gorier the funnier. My brain's immediate reaction to gore is just to laugh at it. Fictional gore, I should say.
Which is kind of I would surmise, kind of along the same lines as there's not really a right way or wrong way to deal with something that puts your brain in a fight or flight mode. Some people with death, for instance, real death, will find the best way they can cope with it is humorous, and it sounds like you're kind of going along the same lines of that when you refer to movie gore.
Oh, definitely.
The extra gory it is, the funnier that you find it.
And it's not like a default, right? So, like, some instances, depending on my mood and my day, gore will catch me to where I will just kind of reflect on it. And when I get in those special moods, what gore becomes is a catalyst to an existential realization that one day I will die. I mean, what better to remind you of your own death than to see someone, brutally murdered in front of you?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight, and I definitely agree with you. But I think at the same time there needs to be a distinction made here, sort of between these two different kinds of gore, perhaps, that you might see often. You're talking about, on one hand, I suppose, the kind of visceral gore that you might see in various kinds of films that really attempt to actually exhibit something that's realistic. And then on the other hand, you sort of have these other kinds of films with over-the-top gore, kind of that are more slapstick than anything, and clearly attempt to be really funny and over the top. So, I mean, I think in both instances you can sort of derive some sort of humor from them, but certainly in the one instance, with a film like Dead Alive where you have over-the-top gore, I mean, for me, this is kind of more appealing than the other type of film that I mentioned, and perhaps a film that you were alluding to.
No, that's a good point too, because I talked about my kind of natural aversion I have to gory films, but a film like Shaun of the Dead, there's over the top gore in that, and I never had a problem with it because I'm kind of laughing along with the whole movie before the gore even kicks in. Or even in another situation, this not technically a gore film or a horror film, but Kill Bill, where the big fight scene at the end where limbs are being hacked off left and right and there's blood spraying everywhere. For some reason, I think there was a big enough disconnect for me in that instance where the gore in that situation didn't bother me. It was more visceral and exciting.
Well,
so maybe for me the aversion is more the suffering factor that tends to give me an aversion to it more so than the amount of gore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And Kill Bill is a really interesting example because it contains, like you say, the example of the over-the-top, zany, limbs are flying over style gore, but it also contained a really, really visceral and, in my opinion, super gory scene where Bill shot his pregnant wife, in the face. Remember that scene in the beginning with the wedding?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene, like, really sticks out. Even now that I'm talking about it, like, the visuals in my head are very detailed, and they draw me right to that movie. And when you think about it from a filmmaker's perspective, what do you want from your audience? You want your audience to really pay attention to the movie and pull something from it. And what better way to grab someone's attention than to remind them that, hey, you don't always sit comfortably in a theater. You could be having your face ripped off right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point that you make regarding Kill Bill. Yeah. So I guess it depends certainly on the filmmaker's intent with what they're attempting. This other kind of trend, which occurred in the mid '80s or the late '80s, there was a series of Japanese films that were released, and they attempted to basically mimic like a snuff film, and basically there's this kind of trend happening, or was happening, which attracted a lot of people, where they would attempt to display these scenes in the most realistic way possible, and it would include things like kidnapping and mutilation and all these different kinds of things. And for something like this, I never really got the appeal, and I've tried to watch these films before, and it's really difficult for me. And this is one of those things where, for me, I mean, I feel like there's a disconnect between me and other people who actually enjoy these films, and this is something that I can't quite put my finger on.
Well,
that's an interesting point. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
I'd like to bring up why I like those types of films, Derek, and I think I can correlate it to comedy. In that, what I really, really like about the super realistic, gory movies, it kind of overlaps with why I like really good comedy, in that it's a quick way and a very efficient way for me to forget that I'm actually watching a movie and kind of feel like I'm in that scenario and in that environment. And what better way? I mean, real fear and real humor are pretty deep-rooted emotions, and they're very easy for all of us to connect to. I mean, we all find almost the same things, or at least some very basic things, terrifying. And I think that that kind of connection is a very interesting connection, especially when it's made between the medium of a film. The film director did this years ago, and you're now watching it years later, and you're connecting right with that filmmaker through this really gory medium. And it's a very raw emotion, and I don't know, I mean, it's hard to convince someone that doesn't like this stuff to like it. Just like it's really hard to convince someone that doesn't like it to stop liking it.
Right. There's also, I mean, we all know that fear or comedy, if we're going to draw the parallel, both of them release dopamine in your brain, right? And I think, Josh, maybe the way that you can enjoy this film is for that moment in time, you're getting the shot of dopamine because it's scary and it seems real and it's visceral. But at the end, you get that disconnect back where you realize it wasn't real and you have maybe a sense of accomplishment, or you made it basically you're proud of yourself for making it through. Would that be semi-accurate?
Yeah, I mean, semi-accurate. There's other factors that go into it, but I'd be a fool to say you're off base with that, definitely.
It's weird because I do claim that I always have this aversion to gory things, but when I sit here and I think about it more and more, war films, the gore in a war film gives me that where I kind of cringe, but I can make it through those easier than I can something along the lines of, I don't know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that type of film, I really don't enjoy because to me, there's something about the suffering in a film where it feels like it's just they're showing suffering for the sake of suffering that kind of gives me the creeps. Like, it gives me too much of an aversion to it.
Why do you feel that in the context of war films that it doesn't bother you as much? Do you feel as though you've, I don't know, just sort of come to the realization that war is necessary and therefore displaying it in this way is an appropriate way to actually utilize gore? Or,
you know, that's a good question. You know, going back to our episode on war, Josh and I both agreed that we're not really in total agreement that war, or not in agreement, but we both felt that war is not necessarily always necessary. I don't know. It's definitely something just in my own head that I think for whatever reason, I justify it where I can handle it more than if it's just a psycho killer going around doing it to people. Maybe because I feel that even though I'm not a pro-war kind of person, I feel maybe there's more justification somehow in that than a serial killer going around just torturing and killing people for the sake of it.
I suppose it makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense in my own head, but as I say it out loud, I mean, it sounds silly, admittedly.
Well, that's the thing I like about the senseless Texas Chainsaw Massacre style stuff, is that it reminds you that stuff is actual. I mean, that stuff is in reality, and I think it's healthy, at least in small doses, to be reminded on a very emotional level that there are serial killers out there that will cut you from limb for limb and just do it because that's what they want to do.
I suppose that the thing that confuses me sometimes is when people say, for example, with the films that I mentioned before, kind of the underground sort of snuff kind of films, obviously not real snuff films, but for these display of supposed snuff, when people say that they enjoy the films, I mean, what does this actually really mean? I mean, what do they mean when they say that they enjoy the film? Because clearly it's not something I wouldn't think that you would enjoy in the same way that you enjoy, maybe like bowling or something like this. I mean, it seems like if you actually get joy from watching these kinds of films, something internally, it seems to me that something might be wrong. I mean, I can understand liking or feeling this kind of visceral feeling, it kind of affecting you in this way, but to actually manifest a feeling of like positivity, it seems, slightly disturbing.
Well, maybe to you and your point of view, but I think that that you're making a point using an example. I mean, what if I say that the joy you feel from watching a horrible movie like your supposed snuff films is more in the same ballpark of going on a roller coaster or doing something dangerous like jumping out of a plane versus like going bowling?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Speaking as a roller coaster enthusiast myself, I mean, I totally do it for the thrill. And it's funny, I've been riding them for years, but the act of waiting in line, the anticipation, the climb up that first hill, I'm terrified the whole time. I mean, I admit it. But once the plunge is taken, I'm having the time of my life.
Yeah, I suppose, though, I'm still thinking that, from the perspective of someone who's gaining enjoyment from these supposed snuff films, the feeling, if it is a feeling of positivity, it seems to be invoked through seeing suffering in another person, which is seeing something that looks very real and very visceral. Whereas in the case of something like a roller coaster or something like this, it's merely adrenaline pumping, which is releasing these sort of endorphins and making you feel a certain way in response to something that isn't something like someone actually suffering, I guess.
Well, sure, but how are you making a leap from someone that enjoys watching these movies to a bad person? Or a sick or wrong person?
I'm saying just that it would seem to me to be a bit strange to actually have these feelings of positivity elicited in response to this. And perhaps that's wrong. Maybe I could be off base on that.
I think we're all philosophers here, so we're going to quibble over words. But when you say strange, I can get behind that. I can agree with that. But earlier you said there was something wrong there, which I do not agree with in the least bit.
I suppose what I meant to say was that I see something wrong with regard to normative standards that have been instantiated. So wrong insofar as people would view this and they would say this is wrong given the societal conception of rightness in that particular context, I guess.
Right. I mean, that's kind of a problem I've always faced with these kind of films too. Some of it I've gotten past, but the movie that always stands out to me was House of a Thousand Corpses. Now, disregarding if it was a good film or not, the idea that someone enjoyed just the extreme torture in that movie gave me a real, at the time, kind of aversion, thinking, God, how does anyone enjoy this movie? For those that have seen it, when he comes out with the skin mask on of the girl's father, I'm like, God, I have had enough. Tap out, please.
And see, I was turning the movie up and dimming the lights and going, hell yeah, crack another beer. This is great.
Yeah, with the House of a Thousand Corpses, I mean, this is, for me, not a really good example because it's actually a film that I liked and one that I thought was okay. But contextually speaking, there were over-the-top moments which, to me, made the whole thing kind of easier to deal with. I mean, you have Sherry Moon Zombie running around in, a rabbit hat, kind of making these strange noises, which to me makes everything better. So
I agree. I have such a crush on her.
Oh God, that just felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape from the whole time I was watching that movie. Guys, how about we take a quick break here, get a little drink refreshment. Josh is good about putting mint leaves in our drinks during breaks.
Oh yeah, I have my people work on it. A lot of money winning in this drink, so you better enjoy every drop and eat the ice cubes when you're done.
All right. So stick with us here on the Philosophy Jerks. We'll be back to continue the conversation on Gore and Gore movies.
This is Colin from episode 9, not Colin, not to be confused with the body part. You're listening to the Philosophy Jerks.
Okay, what we're thinking of as aliens are they're extra-dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with. They are not what they claim to be. They have infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly the Area 51. The disasters that are coming, the military, the government knows about them, and there's a lot of safe areas in this world that they could begin moving the population to now aren't.
They're not doing anything.
They're not. They want the major population centers wiped out. So that the few that are left will be more easily controllable.
You'll see him in your nightmares. You'll see him in your
All right, welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Derek from 80shorror.net. Guys, we went in depth on what makes us like or dislike gore movies, kind of what they encapsulate. But Josh, you were bringing up an interesting question during the break.
Yeah, I was. Derek had mentioned earlier in the show that he had watched his first horror movie at 12, I believe. And
well,
go ahead. I mean, if that's not correct, please correct me.
I was just going to clarify that I've probably been watching horror movies since I was around 6, but the first time that I watched probably the goriest movie that I'd ever seen was around 12.
So. Okay, very well. So Derek is a early bloomer, and so am I actually. I was around 6 or 7 when I started watching horror movies. The very first horror movie that I remember, I was just a little guy, and it was Maximum Overdrive. That movie, Stephen King movie, where all the appliances came to life because of the comet.
Right, yeah.
And there was 2 horrible things that came out of that, me watching that movie that young. One, it was an early beginning to a very large complex in my life of not trusting machines.
Okay.
And 2, I have a really bad AC/DC habit because of that movie.
Oh, I think the latter is definitely the worst of the 2.
Oh, definitely.
What happened to you psychologically, Josh, that you went from not trusting machines to now just being all in on computers and machines?
Well, if it's just us guys, I'm going to be honest, it was the sex robots.
Okay.
I said, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I better do it with all my heart. And I forgave them.
All right. So,
my
movies that
my original question, to get back to that, during the break was, what do we think gory movies does to children at a young age? That seems to be a hot button topic in film these days. And I'm just wondering what you guys think of that.
Yeah, at least from my perspective, it's one of these things where it's really difficult to talk about generally because obviously everyone is different, psychologically speaking, and other ways. So to come up with one specific answer to generalize that it's going to affect all children, in the same kind of way, I think is something that can't really be done. So, I mean, I think that it's one of these cases where it's really ambiguous and it's really a difficult question to answer.
I don't think that it can't be done because it's done every day. I think what you're getting at is it shouldn't be done, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is done, but I think it's one of these things where, people should refrain from doing it, or at least, make it such that this is something that should be handled on an individual level rather than attempting to generalize how it's going to affect everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's along the same lines as the violent video games that pop up every now and then. I still remember the time that my parents learned about Mortal Kombat, and they found out I was playing it, and they sat me down and asked me about it, and I was probably about 12. And I just remember at 12 looking at them and saying, yes, I know it's a game. Do you guys know it's a game? After that, I think they stopped worrying. But I don't necessarily think every kid's going to have a similar kind of response to it either.
Right. I mean, for me, obviously I can only talk about my experiences, but some of my fondest memories involve me going to the video store on the weekends and sort of kind of sneaking down the horror aisle. And for 90s kids and 80s kids as well, you can remember if you ever went down this aisle, looking at the cover art and seeing how different this was than everything else basically in the entire store. It was almost like when you walk down this aisle, it was like walking into another world. And for me, this was what was really fascinating about horror movies in general. It was almost like I would see these creatures on all of these different covers. I would look at the back and I would see these images which I've never seen before. And for me, I mean, this was a way that I think invoked a lot of creativity and kind of sparked my interest in sort of things that were outside of the mainstream, if you will.
Well, I definitely agree in that the cover art for horror movies tends to be vastly different than every other movie in the for us kids that remember it, the video rental stores. And it really strikes me as odd because a lot of the taboos that surround horror movies and whatnot are very similar to pornography, yet we keep pornography in another room, in a locked room, but horror movies are out there for everyone to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting experience I always had growing up, too. Growing up as a kid, my parents didn't really have much problems with me watching something like, The Predator with my dad. But if it was Friday the 13th, forget about it. I wasn't allowed to watch it.
Well, you know why? Because The Predator had one of the most badass high five scenes ever.
Dylan! You son of a bitch.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point.
That one shook mountains.
But anything, it was weird. I could watch an action movie that would have violence in it. But if a movie had too much gore, which is probably part of my psychological issue on horror movies, but if a movie had too much gore or there was sex in it, it was off limits for me. It's a weird dichotomy where some people are okay with violence, just not as long as it's excessive and there's no bare breast shown.
Well, I think it's a natural byproduct, too, of the kind of system that Derek was talking about earlier, where you're trying to apply the same reasoning and caution to horror movies to every kid on the planet in one direct way, and it doesn't work because like you said, I mean, any smart kid is going to immediately see the paradox there.
I don't know. It's tough. I don't have children, so it's hard to say where I would stand on it. I mean, I think I would like to at least think that I know my kids fairly well enough that I would know what they could handle, but you never know. I mean, you might let them watch. I mean, Josh, at 6, you made it okay, but maybe some kid at 6 is going to watch a horror movie, and my God, you won't be able to get them to sleep in their room for a whole week.
Well, that's funny you say that. When I was in first grade and my brother was in kindergarten, we watched, I forget the name of it. Derek, you might be able to help me remember. But essentially, it was a movie where this guy was dressed up as Santa Claus and he was going around killing people.
It might be, well, there were a few movies like this kind of, but it might be Silent Night, Deadly Night, I'm thinking.
Probably, because that sounds familiar. But the whole idea of the story was that my brother and I watched it at my dad's house when we were that young, and we were both appropriately terrified because it was near Christmas. And my brother went to school the following Monday to go in after the weekend. And the first thing out of his mouth, once all the kids got there, was he broke out into a screaming fit and said, "Don't trust Santa Claus, he'll cut you from ear to ear." I mean,
don't let him down the chimney.
It was such a big deal that other kids started freaking out, and there was a whole counseling session. I had to go talk to the school counselor. It was this whole thing. And I remember thinking, even at that time, you guys, it was just a movie. Like, Santa Claus isn't even real. Why would you just tell the kids that?
Right. Well, your brother's younger than you, too, to be fair. But
to be fair, yeah. I mean, he's 21 months younger than me, but still, I mean, really?
I love the idea you had to have a school counseling session.
Yeah, exactly. It called for that. It was that bad that it would call for a counseling session? Bullshit.
Yeah, I think we could probably all be in agreement that as far as kids watching any kind of what I guess we would deem mature content, really, it always falls on the parent's responsibility, in my opinion. I mean, if you think your child can handle it and you're prepared to answer the questions that'll probably undoubtedly come, then go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Oh, go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to articulate my agreement.
Well, good.
Indubitably.
What about you, Josh?
Well, I think it really comes down to a case-by-case basis, and like Derek said, and any parent that's going to only look at a parental rating on a movie or that parental advisory sticker on iTunes or whatever, and make a parental decision based on a fucking sticker, isn't doing their job as a parent, in my opinion. They need to understand the medium and why their kids are even interested in that to begin with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the thing is, it's like there's no possible way that you can objectively rate any movie on a scale in this sort of way, because like we mentioned before, the context of the things that are happening in the movie are entirely different depending on the movie. Like if you're looking at a movie where someone is just committing some sort of over-the-top violent acts and limbs are flying everywhere and it's just slapstick and hilarious. I mean, if you were to explain this on a sheet of paper and then go to this other movie on just this other random movie where all this stuff is happening, people are getting shot, or even the exact same things are happening, but just in a different kind of way or in a different context. I mean, it's going to appear to the person, to the viewer, extraordinarily different. It's going to affect them in entirely different ways. So, I mean, there's just no way that you could actually do that.
No, not without watching every movie beforehand. You're then going, okay, you can watch these and not these.
Right, exactly.
Changing gears just a little bit. Since you run the 80s Horror Net website, Derek, you talked about Dead Alive. That was the first movie you brought up.
This was actually early 90s, but yes. Okay, I'm just being pedantic now. Sorry.
Here we go.
Well, what I was going to ask was, what necessarily about 80s movies is it that draws you more than any other decade?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, it does depend on the genre as well, I think. If we're talking about horror movies specifically, I sort of alluded to it when I was talking about the experiences I had as a kid. But the 80s sort of brought about the creature feature in a greater way than any sort of decade before it did. And in the 80s, this is when you were introduced to all of these sort of super elaborate, insane creatures with all of these really authentic kind of effects. And there's something visually to me that was always really, really appealing and otherworldly in the images that I saw. And this was what drew me to 80s horror more than anything. It was the monsters, it was the creatures, it was the aesthetic of the film in general, and it just kind of stuck with me over the years. And I've never been able to really see this same thing happening in any other decade, aside from the early parts of the decades coming before or after the 80s. So,
yeah, for me too. You and me have had this conversation before, but there's a lot of stuff about the 80s I don't enjoy. The one thing about the 80s I do enjoy is the film that came out from that decade. Mm-hmm. And with horror especially, something that even draws me in, who's not a big horror fan, the older I get and I go back and I watch some of these, I like them more than a lot of other decades. And I think one of the things, at least for me, that sticks out is the creative and practical effects that they used. It's almost like they kind of reached their height in the 80s, like, of doing it the best. The monster features, the makeup and the effects of someone being ripped in half.
Yep.
Before CGI took over.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, to me, I mean, it was that kind of the sweet spot that saw the maximum potential of authentic effects, but just preceded the advent of CGI, which sort of, changed everything after the fact. So I think that it was a very interesting period in cinematic history for that reason.
Well, since we're on the topic too, why don't you give our listeners a recommendation or two to check out on your website? What are some of your favorite 80s movies? 80s horror movies, rather.
Well,
I just can't name one.
Yeah, I could literally go on for a long time, and it's really going to depend on the exposure that someone already has to it. But if you haven't seen Return of the Living Dead, I mean, this is my favorite, probably horror movie of all time. Came out in '85. It saw the perfection of everything that I sort of adore about horror movies, and I can't recommend that film enough. I also like The Thing. Most people have seen The Thing, though. Reanimator, Parents, which is from '89. There are all kinds of really amazing films. Those are just some of the ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head.
Maybe some hidden gems. 80s also saw like you already brought it up, the creature features, the Friday the 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street series.
Jinx, buy me a Coke. Oh, snap, man, we're still saying the same thing. This is amazing.
Michael Myers, etc.
Yeah, I mean, which, it's debatable whether or not they're creatures, but slasher, I suppose, you could use in that regard. But
of the three listed, Freddy Krueger is definitely a creature.
Yeah, I would call.
He's a creature of your dreams. He's a creature of your dreams.
Well, I mean, but he's just a human that's technically burned. So I mean,
he was a human that got burned, died, and became a creature of your dreams.
I mean, it's debatable, I guess.
Okay,
I would say I would actually. Okay, I'm sorry. I would say that. I don't know if I would call call any of them monsters, technically speaking, but I would say that I would agree that out of the three, probably Freddy Krueger is closest.
What about Chucky? Is Chucky a creature?
It's difficult to say again, but I mean, I've always been a fan of the sort of possessed toy genre, and actually there are a lot of films like this that came out, and I've always really liked this, like the Puppet Master movies.
Oh, I love Puppet Master movies.
Yeah. And like the creature, talking about some creature movies again, you saw Gremlins come out, which kind of sparked a whole nother subgenre. You had Critters and you had Ghoulies and all of these different movies, which I also really like.
What was the first Tremors movie from the 80s? I don't remember.
I believe it was from 90 actually, but Tremors is one of my favorites as well.
I love them. They kind of went downhill with the TV series and the third movie, but those first two movies were gold.
They were. There's probably very few movies that I could name that I like watching more than Tremors. I've seen that movie over and over and over again, and I never get sick of it. It has that kind of feeling of, I don't know, just serenity when I'm watching it. So when I'm snacking, I can watch it. When I'm doing something else in the background, I can watch it. I just love that movie.
Another thing about the 80s horror genre is how it kind of found its way into other movie genres from the 80s. One of the movies I'm thinking of is The Burbs. Have either of you seen that movie before?
Oh, yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
I love that movie, the comedy, but the comedy of that movie is kind of a 80s horror plot throughout the whole thing. Is the family next door possessed and doing evil things. And just the way it's shot and the tone just reminds me of 80s horror movies in general. Another one I wanted to ask you, Derek, being the 80s horror expert here, would you consider the first Terminator film a horror movie?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't have it listed on my list on the site, and it's not really something that I would call horror. I mean, genreification of things is difficult to handle because, there are elements of essentially any genre in almost any movie, but it's not something that I would call horror.
The reason I ask is, to me, it's always kind of come off as almost a slasher film, where you have the indestructible slasher on a dead set mission to kill people and a certain person. It definitely has action elements too. That's why I always kind of wonder what people consider that movie to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, now that you mention it, I mean, there are other movies that involve killer robots, which are definitely horror, but
Killbots.
Killbots. You have Chopping Mall, stuff like this. But yeah, I don't know what Josh thinks about that. But I mean, I would probably classify Terminator as sci-fi thriller, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to throw in the genre of science fiction, which, by the way, isn't necessarily a confirmed genre in every movie database I've ever been to. A lot of sci-fi movies will get split into either horror, fantasy, or action, and just kind of disregard the sci-fi genre altogether. But in my mind, I agree with you. It's definitely more of a sci-fi movie than a horror movie. But it's one of those movies, Brian, that kind of walks the line. It's kind of hard to just easily call that one type of movie or another.
Yeah. I was just wondering what your guys' take on that movie was.
Yeah. And this is completely off topic, but I'm going to ask it anyway because we're talking about the 80s and films. So, your thoughts on John Hughes?
Best horror movie director ever.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. The reason that I ask this as well is because I'm always thinking about this, but I've always wondered what a horror movie directed by John Hughes would actually look like.
Well, he did Teen Wolf, did he not?
No, he didn't. He didn't direct that.
Oh, did he write it?
I can't say for sure, but I don't think he wrote it either.
Huh.
John Hughes horror movie. There would still be some kind of teenage life lesson, I would assume, somewhere laden throughout the movie. It's just at some point people would be getting slashed.
Like Molly Ringwald kind of running around trying to dodge a slasher, like, the virginal kind of heroine.
Yeah, maybe like a more sentimental Carrie.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect way of describing probably what that would look like.
You know, it'd be really awesome if John Hughes did redo Carrie, and then at the very end of the movie, it was like heartfelt monologue by Carrie about how she like regretted killing everybody, and she really learned a lesson.
And then you see Carrie walking across the football field.
Exactly,
Yeah.
sun setting in the background. It's great.
With some synthesized music playing.
And there's like she's having fire like follow her right behind her, making a path.
Yes, exactly. I mean,
she can't walk across the football field. She would have to levitate across it.
Fuck yeah, Human Torch style, baby.
Oh, God.
All right, Derek. It's been fun having you on. Would you like to plug the website again and maybe some of your other projects?
Sure. Yeah, it's, like you mentioned, 80shorror.net. I'm planning on updating it all the time now with new blogs, new reviews, new lists, all this stuff. And like I mentioned before, there's over 600 movies on there that you can basically watch instantly, and they're all organized nicely. I'll be adding more videos. I've also got sort of another side project, which both of you guys have been exposed to, but I've started a metal band with my cat called Felis Catus. Felis Catus, and
it's actually quite good, everybody. You should check it out.
It'll be in the show notes for sure.
Yes, I've done a music video with him. It's on YouTube. Maybe you'll enjoy it. I'm not sure, but
all right. So that's 80shorror.net. 80shorror.net. There you go.
That was
all
beautiful.
Right,
the way you spelled it out, that I brought a tear to my eye.
Well, trying to be professional here. So, anyways, Derek, thanks for coming on. I'm sure a time will come down the road where we have you on again.
That was my pleasure.
There's always Halloween, so
it's true.
Everyone else, stay tuned. We got some Q&A coming up. We got a growing list, Josh, that we're just going to have to slowly but surely get to.
I know, these people are too fucking curious.
That's all right with me. That's what we wanted to begin with. So stay tuned. Q&A coming up next on the Philosophy Jerks. Josh, I'm opening up the digital mailbag here. It is Q&A time.
This is so exciting.
It is always exciting, but man, after that conversation with Derek, I'm a little beat, gotta be honest.
I agree, but you know what? The fans come first, so I'm going to persevere through this tiredness and answer all of these questions with all of my heart.
All right, if you can muster up the courage, so can I.
Do it.
All right, this first question, Josh, comes from one Stephen Jewell, and he asked, if we really learn from our mistakes, why are we always so afraid to make them?
That's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah, it is. I kind of think back to our trolling episode for an answer to this question, where we talked about how in your real life, your reputation is a lot of what you live on. So when you make a mistake, there's always the fear of looking stupid or ruining your reputation that I think makes you scared to make mistakes, at least publicly.
Well, I agree, definitely on that. There's no questions about it. But when I hear Steve's question, I can't help but think he's setting up a false dichotomy. What's so wrong with being afraid to make a mistake, but also learning from it? Why can't you have both in the same occurrence?
That's a good point. Yeah, because I guess you don't want to look forward to making mistakes, right?
Of course. I mean,
then you're just a bumbling idiot.
I can relate. Without, jokes aside, the fear for when I go out and do something, the fear to make the mistake is kind of what motivates me to keep going. Because I want to best the fear. I want to say, okay, I am afraid of making a mistake, whether it be small or monumental. I also think that by persevering through the fear, that I'm going to learn a powerful lesson that may or may not change how I think about the universe. And as a philosopher, I can't help but throw myself into situations where I change the way I think about the universe.
Every situation can be a learning experience. Mistakes are no different from things that you did right that you should learn from. Oh, okay, I did that right. That's probably something I should do again in the future. I think that's where I'm looking at it from. It more boils down to every experience that you have, positive or negative, is a learning experience if you haven't experienced it already before.
Oh, definitely. But isn't it interesting, though, that when you think about it in raw terms, you would almost expect the evolutionary advantage to favor not being afraid to, realize your error in something and correct it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what basically fear of a mistake is you're afraid to be ashamed of being wrong about something. But you would think that social pressures and evolutionary pressures would favor the opposite way, where like you would embrace that and you would move forward because you're self-aware enough to look at what you did and realize how you could have done it better.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they mean by you should learn from your mistakes. But I don't think it's necessarily bad to be afraid to make a mistake. You always want to do your best at something. So I think that's why they say learn from mistakes. It's an experience that, okay, you didn't do it right that time. What can you do different the next time?
Oh, for sure. And I definitely think that, by peeling back the layers of that, you're going to find something very interesting. But what that is, I'm not quite sure, because I myself, believe it or not, audience, have not faced up to every single one of my fears. So I don't really know what motivates them.
That's a good point. I would say the same thing for myself, too. I think that's true for everyone. So at the end of the day, Steve, balls up, fucking put your face out in the wind, and enjoy a mistake for what it is and quit being afraid. Dr. Drew out. Bingo. There you go. All right, let's just move on to the next one then. This is from Senor Brandon.
Ooh, a Mexican listener. That's cool.
Oh, self-proclaimed. I don't know. They didn't leave an email, which is fine. You can do that for Q&A. But he asked, if you had the ability to go back in time and relive one event in your life, which would it be and why? Would you alter the outcome of the event or simply relive it? Presumably out of fear that the butterfly effect or the Ashton Kutcher effect on your life at a later time.
Well, that's a good question, too. We always get the best questions. I love it.
I know. It's good. I like that they're sending us these deep-thinking questions.
Well, let's analyze the question for what it is and keep in mind my general philosophy on time travel back from our time episode. I would definitely not change anything about my past, no matter how horrible it was. And believe me, I have my skeleton full of closets. But the fact is that all of those events in this timeline created who I am today. Now, I should preface this answer with the fact that I'm in a good mood today. So if tomorrow I have a shitty day, then yeah, I'm going to lean toward, I will definitely change things so I wouldn't have to experience this shitty day. But generally, I would say no, I would not want to change my past. I would not want to create an alternate timeline of my life because, dude, I have all kinds of cool shit to play with right now. I would not want to jeopardize that. I have vinyl records for days. Why would I want to give that up for a wife and kids?
Okay, that's a good answer. Before I get into it, I do want to point out that she said skeletons full of closets.
You know what? I'm a rapper. I can't apologize for my rhymes.
It was too good. I couldn't let it go. Well, I want to focus more on if you could go back in time and relive any event in your life, would you want to? Yeah, but I don't know if I could pick just one thing. I mean, because you're going to go through all of the positive experiences in your life, I think, that I would like to relive. But there's a lot of good experiences in my life that I don't think I don't know if I would, because I don't know if I could pick just one. That's a tough question.
See, my problem with that is that whenever you strive to do something that's really monumental in your life, the anticipation and the training to get to that moment is really thrilling, and almost more thrilling than the actual moment. But to me, what's most gratifying is reflecting on the fact that I once did that. So I don't think I would want to go back to relive any of that moment, simply because the act of going through that moment is not as important to me, is not as gratifying to me as remembering how I did it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I don't necessarily disagree with you either. I'm sitting here thinking about it, and if I already have the knowledge of the experience, I think you're right. I don't know if I could relive the experience. I don't know if it would be as enjoyable, right? There's no spontaneity to it.
Completely right. I mean, think about this. Think about your favorite cartoon as a child, like or even TV show. Let's say Power Rangers. When I was a kid, I loved the Power Rangers, but god damn it, I'm 32 years old. I'm not going to watch the Power Rangers. That shit does not click with me anymore. And much the same way, if you go back, like your first birthday, or the first time you got to get laid or whatever, or the first time you discovered the internet or made your first friend, it's not going to mean the same if you're the 32-year-old Josh with his mind going back in time to the 8-year-old Josh and getting it on for the first time.
Right. The build-up's not the same. You already have the knowledge of it. You got too much post-knowledge.
Yeah, I mean,
go back and enjoy it as much as you did at the time.
It's almost akin to, like, whacking off to the time you whacked off to a porno.
All right. Fair enough. Yeah, and I'm with you, too. The second part of the question, I don't know if I would change anything. I don't know if I'm so much worried about the butterfly effect. I don't know. I mean, I guess if I hated my station in life right now, maybe I would answer differently. But I think every decision you make or every event in your life leads up to where you're at now. So I guess both of us are saying it's just a big fat no to both of these questions.
Yeah, and I would further the note that you're complicating the matter and that my whacking off metaphor was sufficient.
Fair enough. Good point.
All
okay,
right,
Josh, I know you're ready for this next question, so take it away.
I do. I love this next series of questions because they're all about me. Hurrah! Okay, so anyways.
Josh got real excited by these.
I love it. I love it when it's about me. So this next question comes from a new fan in New Mexico. How cool is that? The fan's name was anonymous, but he wrote, or she wrote, Sammy Fish Sticks and Custard, which is a Doctor Who reference for all you in the not know.
Oh, see, I did not know that, so there you go.
What a loser. Anywho.
Get on with it.
The question goes, hello, you crazy fuckos. I am a new fan from Silver City, New Mexico, and my question is, why can't Josh pronounce the word anonymous? Love your show and we'll keep listening.
Well, good. I'm glad we have a new diehard listener.
I agree.
Josh, I wasn't aware that you could not pronounce anonymous.
Well, it's probably part of my accent. I am from the Midwest, I think, the North Midwest or something like that. But more
I've
importantly,
always called it the Great Lakes region, but
okay, that works. Wherever, if you want to be PC. But okay, and Brian, in the editing, cue the sag like piano music here. But when I was a kid, I was born with a cleft palate, and part of a cleft palate is a speech impediment, because most of my upper lip, mouth, and area where the sound comes out is missing or filled in from hip bone. So once in a while, audience, I will say a word incorrectly or slur it, and you're just gonna have to fucking deal with it, because my brain is more important than my physical deformities. Suck a dick, audience.
There's nothing I can add to that, Josh. Well done.
Thank you. But to keep going with the question, Sammy, a couple of days later, and Sammy, not only did you use the same name, but super hacker Josh Trimble traced your IP address to the same ISP source in New Mexico, Silver City. And so I know this is the same question from the same person. And the second question goes, why do you always say to click to the top right for the Q&A button when the button is actually to the top left? But more importantly, Josh, who is your favorite companion, quote, on Doctor Who, end quote, from the new show and why? I'm guessing Amy Pond because you have a propensity for redheads. Brian, do you watch Doctor Who?
Sparingly.
That sounds like your girlfriend makes you watch it once in a while.
You nailed it.
Oh, I'm like a psychic. Well, let's back up. Sammy, when I originally started the habit of saying click the top right, the Q&A button actually was in the top right. But now it is in the top left, but it's all the way to the right on the top left. And most of my audience I know cannot read the English language, so I want to make sure that they understand at least to click all the way to the right, even if it is all the way to the left.
Yeah, you got it.
Anywho.
Now the second part of this question.
The second part of the question was, what companion from Doctor Who, the new series, would I travel with, and why? Well, I do have a propensity for redheads. I do love a good redhead. They're feisty, according to stereotypical racial standards. But
red, does the orange hair count in this, or just like actual redhead?
Like actual redhead.
There's a difference, all right? Scottish-Irish here.
Yeah, Amy Pond is definitely Scottish-Irish, or pure Scottish. She's very feisty, very much a redhead. Okay. But that's not my favorite companion. And for all of those that watch the new Doctor Who, you'll know who I'm talking about. But my favorite companion was Donna's grandfather. I believe it was her grandfather or her father. I can't remember. I'm really drunk. But anywho, I really like the grandfather as a companion because it was the first time that the Doctor picked up a companion, at least in the TV series, both classic and new, where this companion had gone through wars. This guy was a war veteran, so he killed some motherfuckers. He was hardcore. And when he finally realized who the Doctor was, his only response was, "My God, we must seem like insignificant ants to you." And that really set up the Doctor's best the best response, which was simply, "I have never met anything that wasn't important in the universe." So that mere 2-minute dialogue on the show is what makes my favorite companion of all time. If you don't like it, oh well. Thank you.
I say it's time to close up the digital mailbag for now.
I think so
too. This Q&A session.
But make sure everybody that's listening, if you have your Q&A questions, visit us at the website, philosophyjerks.com, and click the top right button.
No, top left.
It's the one all the way to the right in the left.
All right.
So don't go left because right is right, all right? All right, good.
Okay.
So click the goddamn Q&A button and leave us a question. You can remain anonymous if you like. I don't care. And ask us whatever you feel like asking. We will answer it in a very rude and honest way.
Yes. All right, Josh. Let's get to the music on the show. What did we play? I might as well just say the first song. It was Louis XIV, They're Coming to Take Me Away.
I love that
song. It's an old
song.
Classic. I've always loved that song since I was a kid, and it was just too fitting for this episode. So,
next up, we had a Nick Cave cover of Red Right Hand by the Voodoo Sharks. Great cover, great band. Highly recommend checking them out.
Yeah, I've always loved that Nick Cave song. Made famous probably for most people our age in the movie Scream, or the Scream films. But I did like this cover. I haven't heard it before. I did enjoy it.
Yeah, it was definitely on the Scream soundtrack, but for you comic book nerds, myself included, we fell in love with this song via Hellboy.
Yes. You know what? It was also in Dumb and Dumber.
Fuck that movie.
All right, and the last song, Josh. Take us home with the music.
All right, Brian, the last song we had was by our special guest, Derek, from 80shorror.net. It's his band Catus Fetus, I think. Is that what it is?
It's his cat metal band that he brought up in the interview.
Yeah, exactly. And it's literally Derek playing the guitar, I'm sure some shitty drum machine in the background, and his cat purring and meowing over top of everything.
Yes, this is how Derek spends his time away from the website.
Yes, and when he's not hard at work.
Yes. All right, Josh. Let's see. So we plugged all the music, Q&A. Keep listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, all the podcast. What do you call them? Aggregators?
Aggregators, podcasts, bays. I don't know, dude. It changes every year. I don't keep up with it.
We're out there everywhere. You know, we've gotten to the point now where you can just Google Philosophy Jerks and we come up and you can find all the ways to listen to us. So
there we go. So fucking go to Google, James Powers. Go to Google.
Exactly. All right, Josh, we will be back in 2 weeks with a very special episode.
A topic near and dear to both of our hearts, wrestling and WrestleMania.
Yes, it'll be out in time for WrestleMania weekend, but of course we're going to give it the Philosophy Jerks slant, so should be a good time.
Be sure to join us.
Then, yes, join us for what, Josh?
Just do it over.
I can't remember where I was.
Okay. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
So be sure to join us in 2 weeks for that awesome wrestling episode and more at the Philosophy Jerks.
Yes. philosophyjerks.com. Join us. Keep listening. Keep downloading us. Keep spreading the word. And keep thinking, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Shut